side, intercepted! It's intercepted by Chancellor! Touchdown! 89 yards!
All right, welcome to the second edition of the Real Hawk Talk Show. I'm here with Brian Nemhauser. I'm Jeff Simmons, and it's been quite an eventful week to start training camp. It's only been 3 practices, but it feels like they've been going for a month already with the amount of news that's come out. Last week, we were previewing the camp, and off the top, the 2 guys we were most excited to see, Malik McDowell was Brian's pick. CJ Process was my pick. They opened training camp. None of them are on the field.
Yeah.
I'll tell you this. I'm at my parents' pool in Toronto, and it's Sunday afternoon. I'm having a beer with a buddy, and I'm just relaxing. I was late I'm usually right on the live broadcast. I pick up my phone probably an hour into camp, and it goes into all-out panic mode. Out of nowhere, Malik McDowell, the guy we're both jacked up to see, might not be playing this year. Today, I wake up in the morning. It's probably 9 in the morning, my time, 6 a.m. your time. Kam Chancellor signs a mega extension. 3 years, right in the market, $12 million a year, 25 guaranteed. So off the top, we got to talk about Chancellor. We went over this last week. We were kind of both in a wait-and-see situation, and everyone in the world, on the team at least, is excited about this deal, maybe except for Delano Hill. Because now Chancellor's going to be around for the rest of his career. So off the top, term, money, how it affects the locker room. What are your thoughts on this Kam extension? Are you surprised it happened so fast? And I guess how does it impact the locker room? And I guess Hill is a 3rd-round pick.
Yeah, good. Yeah, great question. And before I even answer, just thanks for everyone for joining. First time we've had a live audience in, which is cool. We're just learning on this, so we'll give it a shot and see how it goes, and eventually, hopefully, add some larger audience to this as we go along. Apparently this can hold as many as 1,000 people at once. That would be pretty chaotic, but it might be fun. So this is all part of kind of growing this community of Seahawks fans that. Respectful, fun, care about the team, want to get the additional details. So thanks for all of you for joining. As far as your question, Jeff, I was happy. I mean, I'd come to terms. I got a lot of questions around the Kam Chancellor potential signing or not signing. What should you do? He's kind of getting older. We talked about it last week. I've pretty much been on the side of this guy is the alpha dog in that locker room. I think he's taken over as much as anyone could from Marshawn Lynch moving on. I don't think there's anyone else in that locker room that commands the kind of respect that he does from his teammates, from the coaches, from opponents. I think he is right now the center of that Seahawks identity from a toughness and intimidation standpoint. And I think without Kam, I think that team looks really different. And so I really, I'm happy for him. I'm happy for his teammates. Obviously we all hope that he's able to stay healthy. And I think the deal is great. If it had been, I thought it was going to be 4 years with likely something that would cut down to 3 or 2, but a 3-year deal with really 2 years guaranteed, I think is very, very reasonable, and the Seahawks should consider themselves pretty fortunate that they were able to get him for that.
I was pretty surprised it was 3 years as well, and I think the way he's had some durability issues, and he's missing 3 to 4 games this season. I thought if you can get him for 2-3 years, it's right in the money spot, and they got him for 3 years, which is perfect for what you want from him, how long he'll probably last, and what a good sign for the locker room. With all those questions about how the locker room is now, and you sign the guy who everyone in the room looks up to. And it's hard to find anything wrong with this. The one question that kind of was going around today, and I'd like to hear your thoughts on this one, was I mentioned Delano Hill earlier. The team spent a 3rd-round pick on Hill, not knowing probably Kam Chancellor's future. If Kam was their number 1 priority the whole time, do you wonder at all about that pick, or is having depth after Kelsey McRae was pretty inconsistent at that spot, and you have a guy who's going to miss probably a couple games a year based on how he plays. Do you think they should regret that pick at all, or is it just a luxury to have that kind of depth?
Yeah, I don't have that reaction at all. I know a lot of people talked about that today, and my philosophy when it comes to roster building and the reason I really support what the Seahawks did is you go where the talent is in the draft. I'm not a big proponent of, you obviously have to factor in need, and Schneider's been very clear about how they do that. But this was a draft that was rich in secondary talent. And so I think you want to dig into that, dip into it as much as possible, add that to your roster. And if that means you've got more depth for a couple of years in that part of your roster, great, no problem. And I think realistically, that secondary is getting older. Even if they are not going to be off the team, which we hope they're not, they're going to probably have more downtime. They'll probably benefit more from rotating reps. People forget that Kam Chancellor's rookie year, he didn't play almost at all. Lawyer Malloy was the safety that year. He helped bring Kam Chancellor up. And what Pete Carroll did and what he does that's so great is he finds roles. He'll define a really narrow role that a rookie can get on the field. And for Kam Chancellor in that rookie year, it was goal line. It was short yardage. It got him on the field in some of those situations and got him experience. And by the time he came around the next year, he hit the ground running. So if Delano Hill is a special teams ace and can come in certain sub packages or just give Cam a blow now and then, and next year he starts taking on more time, great. Definitely no issues there. And I think there's some other guys, rookies I was watching in camp today. Shaq Griffin, reminded me as I was watching him do special teams practice. Richard Sherman, he broke in special teams as a gunner as well. People forget that, but for the first 5 or 6 games of that season, he wasn't playing. He was a gunner on special teams and was great at it. So I think these guys can upgrade your team, even if they're not necessarily playing in the position they were drafted for.
I totally agree with you there. And I kind of rolled my eyes when I've seen that talk going around Twitter that they might have wasted a pick or one of the issues this team has had the last couple of years is depth. They haven't had one guy goes down, and it's kind of, you saw what happened with Earl last year. Obviously, he's a pretty irreplaceable piece. And I saw some people questioning why they would sign Bradley McDougald and why they would spend a pick on Hill. You want to be in position like they were in 2013 when they had the luxury of all those players on their rookie deals. If there's going to be injuries in a football season, you want to be in position where you can have it, and at the same time, you're going to have Hill pushing Cam, and that's only going to make him better. And you want those guys barking on that for playing time and having Hill on special teams and having Hill potentially, you can use him in some sub packages, maybe sort of like how Deion Buchanan's used in Arizona. There's ways to get both those guys on the field. So I think it's way too early to start wondering why they drafted him or why didn't they know they'd sign Chancellor, all that kind of stuff. I think it's about time this team got some good news after kind of the way this offseason's gone.
Yeah. I would just add there that in general, philosophy has to be add the best players you possibly can whenever you can add them, however you can add them. And if a guy like Bradley McDougald's available on the cheap and he's a great player you can add in, you do it. And, same thing goes for the draft. And what you'll find is if you have a surplus, that gives you opportunities down the road to make trades. The Patriots, I think, do a pretty good job of this. They've talk about a surplus. They drafted a quarterback in the first 3 rounds of, 2 of the past 3 drafts. So, I think people need to go where the talent is and things will work out otherwise.
Yeah, and we touched on this at the top of the show, and obviously this was the news that kind of shook everyone up on Sunday. Malik McDowell doesn't report to camp initially. He has an accident which was reported as an ATV accident, and there's been more or less some leaks about what some of those injuries have been. I think it was an NFL Network reporter that said there was some facial injuries and a concussion, and he reported to camp today. And I saw you were doing some research on one of the major injuries that he was reported with. Have you gotten more comfortable with some of your findings there?
Yeah, I'm always cautious there because obviously I'm not a doctor, and I don't want to pretend to play one even on a web show, but you know, I'd heard some of the same rumors. You know, Davis, Sue, friend of mine, great follow on Twitter. I'm sure everyone's already following him. And, you know, we all have our sources inside, or a lot of us do, and hear different things. Davis has heard that, you know, he has an orbital fracture, you know, that's the eye socket, right? And source said 90% likelihood that he was going to miss the season. I've heard from other folks that it's not nearly that serious and that, you know, he might be back on the field soon. I kind of look at these things as logically as I can, and, you know, and that might not be that logical sometimes, but, you know, let's say it is an orbital fracture. I just started looking around at how many people had gone through orbital fractures in the NFL, what their recovery time had been. Seems like a pretty logical way to kind of figure out what what Malik's might be. And there haven't been that many orbital fractures that I've seen or that were reported on. And the ones that there have been have generally been at most, you know, 4 to 5 weeks. I think that's on the outside. And, you know, I think when you consider that there aren't that many of these injuries in general in the NFL, you know, the only time that it ends up being a really long injury is like 3 months if you're a MMA fighter or a boxer and you're not wearing a helmet, and the whole point of the sport is to punch each other in the face. So, you know, I think we'll see. This may be pretty minor. It may be more about the concussion than any facial injury. And, you know, now he's in Seattle. That's a great step. And let's hope by the end of the week we get a little bit more clarity on what's going on with him.
I know. I had a dark thought when the news first came out, and there was some hesitation from some people when they made the pick because of his history of his work ethic and and maybe it was one of those scenarios where Seattle thought they can fix a guy that maybe the rest of the league. Maybe I'm wrong here, but it kind of brought back memories of Percy Harvin. And logic has come back a little bit. Obviously, these scenarios are completely different. It's just one of those things where I remember when camp started in 2013, the first day, Percy's not in the field, and it was the same thing. Then the labrum news gets out, and it's like a cloud over all of training camp. Was I way off in that thought, or is it just brought back like a bad memory? I remember exactly where I was in 2013, and I remember trying to coping with that news, and it was kind of the same reaction. Maybe this is completely different. Hopefully McDowell's okay. That was that dark thought that came to my head.
Yeah, I mean, I'll admit that when the news came out, besides just being, I was pretty crestfallen because I told you and I've told other people that the entire offseason strategy rested on how Malik McDowell panned out. If he ended up being half of what they say he is, then the rest of the draft class could just kind of play along and not have to necessarily show out in order to be, you know, strong. But if he didn't pan out and they traded back twice and they missed on, you know, some other guys that could have helped them this year, then the whole plan kind of goes up in smoke. And, you know, there's an old saying in business, which is you never get fired for picking IBM. And, you know, John and Pete are not, you know,
they don't swear by that.
People. They don't think that way, but there are times that they should, and people can disagree or say, "Hey, you're not a GM or coach. You don't know what you're talking about." From my point of view, I'll share it. I think that risk is always something that factors into any decision you make, and there's got to be a risk-reward balance. And, you know, I felt like there was lower risk choices that they could have made. You know, if Malik works out and is a disruptive interior defender, then it will be a fantastic set of decisions they made, because those are really hard to find. But when you have a guy that has some of these question marks and then he makes a decision like this, we don't know all the story about it. He's supposedly been a passenger in this thing. Who knows if he was just taking a ride between two houses and something crazy? Like, we don't know. It could have been something that any house,
for that.
You know, we just don't know. And like I've said on Twitter, I made all sorts of stupid decisions when I was 20 years old, and I didn't have millions of dollars either. So I'm not going to malign him, but just from a general roster management and impact perspective, some people are going to try to tell you, hey, he didn't play last year. The team will be fine without him. This team was built in part with the assumption that they were going to have someone like him. And so he's a big loss if he can't play. And they don't have somebody who's really viable to replace him. They have other guys that can play his spot, but there's no other guys that really are similar in what they can bring to the table.
No, he's a potentially dominant player. And the guy that jumps to mind now, if we're trying to move forward, I don't want to assume a timeline on the injury because I don't have enough information, but Quentin Jefferson is the guy who kind of jumps to the top of the line right now. I know Jaron Reed's got some snaps in the nickel package early on. But really Jefferson's the one who's really built to play that third down interior rush role. That's kind of why they traded up for him last year. Have you seen anything from him at camp early on? I know he worked out with Ben and Averill a lot in the offseason, and I haven't seen his name come through a lot in early training camp reports. Has he done anything yet?
He's been coming off of some injury as well. And, there hasn't been anything that's jumped out so far. He actually sat, I think he didn't participate in a number of the team drills today. The team does that with players that are still kind of recovering from injury. Cassius Marsh hasn't been, participating in a lot of those drills, but he had pads on today. So there's a fair number of guys that end up in that kind of situation. But no, I haven't, Quentin Jefferson has not flashed for me yet. And I'll keep an eye out on him. But again, I can't stress enough that Quentin Jefferson was a 5th round pick that they moved up for, and he might be good, but the likelihood that he's going to be someone like what they're, Calais Campbell, which is who they're pretty much talking about McDowell being similar to. Yeah, I just don't see that. So, but yeah, I think maybe now is a good time to let people know if they have some questions. I think they can raise their hands on their screen.
We already have one question in there.
We do. All right. Mm-hmm. Is this in the chat pod or is this someone that's raised their hand?
Well, let's try to get them in here. All right, it's from Sean Thompson. I hope he's still hanging around here. And he put his...
Hey, Sean, you there?
Yeah, here we are.
Yeah.
Hey, dude.
Hey, guys. How are y'all?
Good. Right. Good to meet you.
Yeah, good to meet y'all. Thanks for doing this.
Yeah. Before you ask your question, can you tell us where you're from?
Yeah, I'm in Austin, Texas.
Oh, wow.
Born and raised here all my life. About 8 years old, I became a Seahawks fan down here and just stayed with them throughout the 90s and the early 2000s, and now we're on the other side, so it's great.
That's the sign of a true Seahawks fan if you made it through the 90s. So
yeah, I watched week 1 last year in Austin, Texas. The Seahawks Dolphins game. That was a sweaty one for me.
Oh yeah, it's hot. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
I think I was just playing around with the raise your hand thing. I was going to ask Brian if he got that replica trophy at Tiffany's. He turned the light on early.
But as a matter of fact, I didn't. But Softy turned me on to a place. What's it called? It was up in. I'll try to remember what it was, but it was the best money I spent. I look at that thing every morning. I'm pretty happy about it. So
yeah, that's pretty sweet. Okay, so here's a real question for you. Do you guys have a huge concern about Blair Walsh like I do?
Yeah. The first day, it seemed like I think maybe Bob Condotta of the Seattle Times reported that Walsh missed two of his 4 field goals the first day of camp. I saw him miss one of them. He hasn't missed any since then that I've seen. He's actually been doing some punting too, which I don't know if that's just for fun, but he's been doing some of that as well. Look, I thought it was surprising that they moved on from Stephen Hauschka. I think Hauschka got a bad rap last year and was really affected by really poor long snapping, and that really messed up that entire system, and that it got in his head and eventually, caused him to have some uncharacteristic misses. I think the team's going to regret not having him around. I know he costs more money, and quite honestly, if I had the choice, I'd rather the team save money on punting than on kicking. And, they've stuck with a pretty old John Ryan. And I don't love the Blair Walsh move. I'll be completely frank. I don't love it. I think it's a big risk. I think that it could end up unraveling the season in ways we don't want. But this guy has been an all-pro kicker. And, the team's given him a chance to prove that he can return to that form. So it's not like they picked up some kind of loser off the street.
I'm closer to you, Sean. I was 9 out of 10 in panic mode when I saw Bob's tweet the other day. I was on our lads looking up depth charts of kickers, looking at the Bucks and looking at teams they could trade for already. And once I saw some of the stats that came out today, I calmed down a little bit. But one of my best friends in media is a Vikings fan, and when they signed him, he said, "Get ready to lose your hair." And obviously, they've gone through some tough losses with Walsh. The Seahawks game we all remember, where he completely shanked that kick, and last year he just totally lost it. And I think that overshadows a player that had a pretty good career. He was an all-pro player. For you now, I'm just cautiously optimistic. I want to see him in the games, but for a team that wants to play with running the ball and playing tough defense and win close games, you got to have a guy who can convert there. And if Walsh is as scary as he's looked at times, that's really going to cost them. So around the 53-man cut, I bet you they're going to be sniffing around other guys, and I wouldn't be surprised if they totally swap kickers by that point.
Thanks for the question, Sean. If you have others, feel free to come back on.
Okay.
All right. Thanks, man. All right, that was a good question. I was actually going to get to that question next on my list. So that that covers one of the big ones. Oh, we got another question, it looks like.
All right, let's take it.
All right, hold on. Let me find Tim Fink. All right, Tim, we're calling you into the show now. Hey, Tim, how you doing?
Good. How's it going?
Hey, Tim. Good to see you.
Hey, so just quick question for you guys. What do you think about Dion Jordan? Do you think he can kind of fit into the role maybe Malik McDowell was going to fit into?
First, you got to tell us where you're coming from, Tim.
I'm calling from Arizona.
Nice. I'll be down there for the game later this year.
Yeah, it's always a lot of fun. It's except for last year, got a little testy at the 6-6 game. A lot of fans accused me of cheating out. And I don't know what we did to cheat today, but go ahead. But yeah, Washington, big Seahawks fan down here for 8 years in Arizona now, so it's fun.
Awesome. Great having you. Go ahead, Jeff. Why don't you take the first stab at the Dion Jordan question?
Right now with Dion Jordan, he needs to get on the field, and he hasn't been able to participate in the offseason program yet, and he had to get his knee cleaned up from what I understand. And I don't know if the team's counting on him much. I think that was part of why they signed Marcus Smith, who's going to get some snaps at that nickel defensive end role. I think it's kind of a long shot for Jordan until he gets healthy and shows he can play and shows that he's over some of the things that burned his career in Miami. I think he's more of a long shot at this point. I know Pete loves kind of these reclamation projects, and he was a guy who played in the Pac-12, and they knew him probably from Oregon in the Chip Kelly days, and he's a guy with a lot of talent, and he does have the skill set maybe to do that, but until he gets on the field, I can't say that I'm comfortable saying that he can fill into Malik McDowell's role because he hasn't really played in 3 years, and you're lucky if you can get anything at this point.
He's been on the practice field, which McDowell hasn't, so you give him that credit for that. But he has not been practicing. And as Jeff said, he's recovering from injury. This is a guy that has either been injured or smoking pot. not that it's a crime in our state, but it's definitely been keeping him off the field in the NFL. So, this is absolutely his last chance. And I'd like to bet on his talent to kind of prove himself once he gets on the field. But I've just seen time and again, I've fallen for it in these training camps where they bring in someone of big name or big pedigree, and they're not on the field and they can't play. And you wait and you wait and wait. Last year it was not quite as big of a name, but what was the defensive tackle from New England that
Saliga?
Silver Saliga. I thought he was going to be a pretty big addition for us. I liked the way he played in New England. Couldn't get on the field. We've seen Terrell Owens, come and go. Anyway, I'm selling on Deion Jordan. And he is one of those guys, though, that if he does get on the field, clearly has had enough talent to get people's attention. So maybe there's more upside than I'm giving him credit for.
Yeah, my initial thought was why didn't they let him go after they found out that he had an injury? And then with light of this McDowell injury, I was thinking, well, maybe that's the reason they're holding on to him, as opposed to maybe giving that roster spot to someone that can come in and compete, from day one. Maybe he's kind of a hedge bet in a sense for McDowell right now. And that's the reason why they're, holding on to him.
Yeah. One of the things I think that's possible. But in general, the type of position or skill set that will always get the longest leash, pass rushers. And so, if there's even a minor chance that he can be a productive pass rusher and you can get him for pretty much nothing, teams will take their time. And you guys mentioned Marcus Smith, and he's a guy who Pete's talked about as a Sam linebacker. They believe, he can be a Sam linebacker, and he was a former first-round pick of Philadelphia that they signed. I do not see him as a linebacker. I mean, he's just not fleet of foot. He's not good in space, but he does show promise as a pass rusher. Not on the edge, not in the middle, but he's in the past 2 days he's shown some promise. Although I will say at the end of the day he looked to pull his right calf, and was stretching that out. So I'm guessing he's going to be out for at least a few days, because they tend to be pretty precautious with that stuff. But thanks for the question, Tim.
Thank you. This is great, guys. Keep up the great work.
Yeah,
thanks a lot
for coming on.
All right. Sean is calling back in. Do you want to bring him back on, or should we try to get someone else on?
Well, let's keep going with some of the other questions you had, and then we'll bring back some other folks.
So yeah, as we were going to get into earlier, Brian's been at training camp. He's been doing great stuff for the Hawkblogger website, and the exclusive stuff he's been doing too has been fantastic. The instant observations, and I'm not privy to being in Seattle. I can't get down to camp, so this is kind of the segment where Brian's going to shine here. I'm more going to interview him here, and obviously, from the outside looking in, there are things that have jumped out to me right off the top, just from reading Brian and reading some of the beat writers down there. The guy that I kept hearing about all offseason, and I didn't really believe it, if I'm being honest, was Jeremy Lane. And it seemed like typical Pete offseason talk where he's buzzing about someone else, but I kept hearing that something clicked with him. I don't know if it was the down year. I don't know if it's the potential of getting cut after this season, but from you and from Shale Capadia, everyone's just raving about this guy. Is this, what are you seeing on Lane, and do you think he's a lock for that starting corner job as of now?
Yeah, I mean, as I mentioned in the last time we talked, I'm probably a good judge of at least a good person to talk about Jeremy Lane, because I've been kind of a skeptic, not a huge believer, and I don't think he does anything really well. As part of what I tend to like, guys that have real strengths. People we're not fans of Brandon Browner because he wasn't great in coverage, and sometimes, or he was kind of clumsy, or he'd hold. But Brandon Browner had immense strength. I mean, he was a guy that against certain receivers could completely shut them down and would create turnovers and was fantastic in run support. So there's things he just did really well. And for me, I'll take that over guys that are kind of okay at a bunch of stuff, but not great at anything. And I kind of thought that was Jeremy Lane as far as I've evaluated him. And I will say he looks more fluid, more natural as an athlete this year, is what I've noticed so far. I will say they did 1v1 coverage drills today with pads. First time they've done that. I got to look at a lot of guys. I was watching that drill pretty closely, and Lane had 3 penalties for holding or defensive pass interference. And you know, he did okay in that drill. I don't think he earned the praise that Pete gave him today. I thought actually some of the other corners impressed me a little bit more. I really liked what I saw from Shaq Griffin today. I almost said Shaq Lawson. I thought Nico Thorpe did a nice job. I'm looking through my notes here through each different. One of the things I liked about Shaq Griffin, he's not the biggest guy, but he showed really nice hands and press. He knocked back Rodney Smith, who's 6'5", and Smith still managed to get his feet back and make a catch. But I was impressed by Griffin's strength there. And later on in practice, Griffin was just in the uniform, in the jersey of Cyril Grayson, running a go route down the left side of the field. And Grayson's the fastest guy on the team. So I haven't seen guys with that tight of coverage that often. So I really liked what Griffin showed today. Another guy that I'll throw out there that was impressive was impressive is probably too strong, but a guy I'm starting to watch a little bit more is Demetrius McCray. He wears number 39, like Brandon Browner. Looks a little bit like him because he's tall. I think he's 6'2", maybe 6'3", and you know, he's got some interesting potential. So he was another one that kind of stood out today.
Yeah, he played with Gus Bradley in Jacksonville, so he's familiar with the scheme, and we didn't really touch on him last week. We were more focused on DeAndre Elliott. He was kind of our guy we were intrigued by. I haven't heard anything about him at camp so far. Has anything he's done jumped out to you positively or negatively, or is he just doing his job and not flashing in any way?
Yeah, he's solidly. I mean, he's solidly on the roster. I think that he does his job well. I think he played fine today. He hasn't made that many flash plays yet, but he's running with the first team on special teams and all the coverage units that I'm seeing. That's always a great sign for guys that are backups. I think Elliott, you know, I told you I thought Elliott has a potential to challenge for that starter spot, or at least push Nico Thorpe for the third corner spot, which would be an outside corner position when Lane comes on the field. That hasn't happened yet, but I still believe that's true. I think Elliott's really solid. I think he's a good tackler. I like his overall athleticism. So I'm still buying on DeAndre Elliott for sure.
Yeah, so the cornerback's obviously one of the battles everyone's watching. The other one to me that really jumps off the page is at right tackle. I know Jermaine Ifedi has had a mixed start to camp, some really good moments, some really rough moments yesterday with Cliff Averill. The guy who really intrigues me still, and that out of this draft class, is Ethan Postich at right tackle. And I used to cover hockey a lot. And when I covered hockey, one of the things you notice is a really good defenseman. You don't notice him because they're so assignment correct. You only notice them when they're screwed up. Postich on film really reminded me of that. He's very assignment correct. He's very technically sound, which is so different than the linemen they've had. And you almost can go through practice and a neutral observer might not notice him. Some people have really raved about his play. And some people, he's just been very quiet. You haven't heard anything about him, which is almost the exact opposite of Ifedi. So where do you kind of stand on that battle so far? And what have you not liked about either player?
Yeah, this is one of those ones where I have to answer in two ways. One,
sure,
you know, what I've noticed and how I evaluate, which, you know, take that for what you will. And then how I think the Seahawks evaluate. Because I think I've learned very clearly over the past 5 years that I value different things in offensive linemen than Tom Cable does. And so, for example, I can watch a player struggle mightily. Michael Bowie was a guy, for example, that was just a disaster in 1v1 pass rush drills. And Alvin Bailey, back when he was a rookie, he was a godsend. I mean, I was so shocked to see how effective he was, a former guard at left tackle. He was a fantastic pass blocker as a rookie. We all know Michael Bowie's the guy that got the opportunity, and that's the guy they believe in. And the main reason being is that team will always value someone who can run block and be physical in that way over somebody who is a better pass protector. And so knowing that, Jermaine Ifedi is a far more intimidating, imposing figure at right tackle than Ethan Posich is. Posich is a guy that is not that big. I mean, he's not tiny, but he's pretty narrow. And
that's what I mean. He's different than the guys they've drafted.
Yeah, he looks more like a big tight end than he does like hulking offensive tackle. But as you said, very steady. I have not seen any real big mistakes from him. I haven't seen him get really badly beaten yet. And Ifedi, I have. I think he did better today. Yesterday was a disaster. I mean, he looked like this was never going to work. As that's how bad it looked yesterday from my point of view. He was barely getting a hand on Cliff Averill. He was barely taking a step before Averill had taken 3. So that was pretty bad. I think today he recovered. I respect that. The pads were on. He knocked Averill to the ground a couple times. Averill kind of slipped both of those times, but I'll give Ifedi credit. So yeah, I think the battle's on. I think there's some other battles on that line that are interesting. Like I'd bring up Ode Abushi.
That was going to be my next question.
Really impressed me today. But yeah, go ahead. What was your question?
Well, that was going to be my next question. Abushi is a guy that no one really thought of as a starter. He was more, I guess it was thought that he was more of a depth player, but they opened up camp with the ones, and he's ahead of Mark Lewinsky. And obviously, Cable likes to switch a lot of it and move guys around, but is Abushi a guy we should be looking at as a potential starter, or are they just really trying things out?
No, I absolutely. I think he was in the starting spot the first 2 days of camp at right guard next to Ifedi. And today, Glowinski was back in there as the starter at right guard. They tend to do this where there's areas where they really want to see competition. They'll rotate players. So you'll see myself or other reporters who, I shouldn't say other reporters, actual reporters who will say, hey, Glowinski's the starter, and that's never accurate. Like they tend to, especially early in the first week, they're trying to figure out who is, what their depth chart really is. But yeah, they seem to be rotating there. I thought I had a couple notes where I had to remember who 63 was because I'd been watching Abushi, who's 73 enough, and I kept writing his number down because he just, in 1v1 pass rushing drills, he was stoning guys, and he shows strength. He seems very steady. I haven't been able to see him in the run game that much, so that's another thing I'll have to kind of watch, and it's really hard to judge that, but in these practices. But I would give the edge to Abushi at this point, 3 days in.
Yeah. And yeah, we'll stay on a positive note. Other than Abushi, I guess looking across the roster, you've probably touched on this in some of your observation write-ups. Who has really stood out to you that kind of came in under the radar that you didn't really expect here? And we're not talking like big-time players. I'm talking like middle-of-the-road guys who are battling for roster spots. Who's jumped out to you so far?
Well, the guy that I thought really stepped up today and has had a solid camp so far is J.D. McKissick.
Okay.
Running back last year, came from Atlanta. We signed him off the Atlanta's team. And he's playing wide receiver exclusively this year. And One, he looks really, really natural as a returner. He's done that before, both as a punt returner and a kick returner. He looks explosive. He looks dynamic. I think he offers something there. And then he just he looks like he's ready to ascend on the receiver side. I think he offers something a little bit unique. I was actually chatting with a couple of the different guys on the team and getting their take, and comparing. I think he and Cyril Grayson are the same body type, very similar. And Grayson stood out to me the first day as like, wow, this guy's really fast. And then the second day, he was dropping every kick return and dropping passes that were hitting him in the hands. So I think he was showing his inexperience. Today was a better day. He was the only player I saw that beat Earl Thomas deep in 1v1 drills, beat him by like 2 or 3 yards for a touchdown. He had a couple other long gains, I think another touchdown. So he had a good day today, but McKissick's a guy that, I got different responses from different players. Some people like Grayson's speed and upside, and other people like McKissick's ability to separate right now and his more refined game. And if I had to pick one, I think McKissick looks much more like an NFL player right now.
They got an abundance of skill players, man. And the guy that keeps popping up in some of the media reports right now is Chris Carson, who was kind of the Pete Carroll push in that last round of the draft. With him and Alex Collins and Lacey's being raved about and Rawls is being raved about, and Procise got back to practice today. How are they going to find room for all these guys?
They're not. They're not.
You're not wrong.
I think I like what I've seen from Carson. I'm not ready to say that, to anoint him as a guy that's really on the ascendancy. I see it pretty clearly as, you've got Rawls and Lacey and Procise. I think Alex Collins has had one of the best camps of anybody so far. I wrote about him a lot yesterday. Didn't have as big of an impact at practice today, but first 2 days he really stood out. I think he's the clear fourth back, and everyone else is fighting for scraps. So I think Carson looks the part. I thought he ran well today. He had a couple of touchdowns. The line created some nice holes for him. I think Mike Davis also has looked at least as good as Carson. I'd say probably better. And once Procise was back at practice today, but he didn't really do anything. Once Procise is taking snaps, the guys like Mike Davis and Carson are going to start barely seeing the field. So it's going to be really hard for them to make an impression.
And yeah, to me, that's been one of the bigger stories in camp. And to me, something that's really jumped out just from studying the roster and studying the moves they've made, their special teams unit should be loaded up compared to last year. Some of the guys they got brought in, Terrence Garvin, Michael Wilhoit, the trade for DJ Alexander, and then they brought back Mike Morgan, which kind of surprised me. They had moved out from Arthur Brown, brought back him, who's a pretty good special teams player. This unit should be loaded up from last year. And not only that, it seems like there's kind of been a change that Wilhoit seemed to be the odds-on favorite to start at that linebacker position, the Sam spot. And it seems like he's more moved to the middle. And now it looks like it's going to be Garvin who's taken over. They mentioned his secondary skills today. He played there at college, and he's more suited to playing coverage. Is he now the total favorite for that role, or is it still Mike Moe or maybe even Smith? It's completely flipped from what we thought it'd be.
Well, what did we talk about last week? Or my 4 keys to how the Seahawks need to change and get back to their identity. 1 was running the ball. 2 was turnovers, creating takeaways primarily. 3 was explosive plays, and 4 special teams. And of all of those, the one that they've shown the greatest investment and alignment on turning around is special teams. They have almost assembled a dream team of special teams players that they brought in, and I think it's a great way to go because you can get those guys at affordable rates. They're generally not top of the line, and you add draft picks that are young and great athletes. Like there was a time Kam Chancellor and Richard Sherman and Earl Thomas, all those guys were on special teams, and some of them still are. Doug, those guys are all still doing that stuff. But now you can have some of these young guys step in and make plays there. I think that's huge. I think I'm really excited to watch that group play because by the way, that's a great way to help create turnovers. I mean, we've all seen Ricardo Lockett fly down the field and knock the stuffing out of a returner, creating a fumble. So, I think that's potentially a huge, huge change in the way this team is composed compared to last year, probably the biggest change. So I love that. I think you're right for calling that out. And then you had asked about Will Hoyt and Garvin, and I admit I thought Will Hoyt was a foregone conclusion at the Sam position. I've not enjoyed playing against him in the past. I think he brings a lot to the table, even though he's a little bit older. But man, I look at a guy like Garvin, and I see why the team's been raving about him, way more so than even Lane. We talked about him at the outset and how the team was hyping him. Garvin, he moves extremely well. And the thought of him with KJ and Bobby, it's pretty exciting. I think, Bruce Irvin is one of my favorite players. Really sorry to see Bruce go. He didn't move this way. He's a little bigger of a guy, a little more of a straight line guy. Garvin, he moves all directions really well. So I think he's going to play. I don't know if he's going to start, but he's going to play. And Will Hoyt has also looked good and is, dependable and reliable. You're going to get there, and probably maybe a better pass rusher. So the way I mentioned yesterday, I think this is the first time they'll have that kind of linebacker depth since they lost Malcolm Smith, who's gone on to do really good things for the Raiders. And let's not forget, he's the one that was the Super Bowl MVP. So having depth there is pretty helpful.
Yeah, it seems to be the theme across the roster. Just they've loaded up depth at so many different spots. And I guess we only mention Ifedi as someone who's kind of disappointed. I guess we got to talk about it. It's part of the job. But has anyone else kind of let you down so far, or kind of been less of maybe what you thought going into camp?
It's a good question. Less than what I thought. Well, Nas Jones, one of our third round picks, he hasn't shown me much yet. Granted, he's supposed to be kind of a run stuffer, so how much can he show? But he seemed a little overweight when I saw him yesterday. I have to admit, when I looked at him again today, I was like, maybe that was the wrong guy, because he didn't look quite as overweight today. Maybe he went on a quick diet, but yeah, I haven't seen much from him to get me excited. I would say there is one guy that comes to mind. I really was hoping Tanner McAvoy would take a step forward, and that was a guy I hyped up before he even really took the field. Camp, I thought he was an interesting athlete, and he turned out to be a super interesting athlete. But so far, he's had some drop passes, not been involved. Honestly, he looks like the guy he looked like last year, where I had no expectation once training camp and I got my eyes on him, no expectation that he was going to make the roster until he got into preseason games, and he just started making plays. So maybe he's just a gamer, but he doesn't move that quick. He doesn't get separation. And so far, he hasn't shown the ability to grab the ball from, away from other defenders. So he's been a guy I've been a little bit disappointed in.
It's a tough battle for him with Kenny Lawler too, and Kason Williams and Darbo and David Moore. There's not a lot of room for those guys. There's probably one or two spots up for grabs. So someone like him taking a tough start to camp, that's really tough, because you got to really battle for those spots, and he's going to really need to shine during those games. And it seems like we got some more questions here, and we're going to try to get Robert in here. Let's see if this is going to work. Robert asked us a question. Let's see if we can get him in here. Hey, Robert.
Hey, guys. How you doing?
Good.
Oh.
How you doing, Robert?
Very good. From Toronto, same city as Jeff.
Oh, you
Just-
guys should
there
be
we
hanging
go.
out together.
Yeah, just wanted to know. Sorry, getting some echo here. Update on Deshaun Shed. I think he's the man at cornerback. I'm not sold on who's the guy we're just mentioning?
Jeremy Lane.
Jeremy Lane. Yeah, just like the body type better of Deshaun Shed. I'm just wondering when you think he'll be back.
Yeah, it's a good question. I think Deshaun's been on the field. He's been actually coaching up some of the younger players, which is good to see. And they just mentioned that he just had another procedure done to help clean up his knee a little bit, which they think will help get him back a little bit sooner. But my expectation is this guy got injured in the second round of the playoffs last season. I think to expect him back anytime before week 6 or whenever the PUP, they can eligible to bring back. He might even come off later than that. Some people don't realize, but that's the first time you can take someone off PUP. There's also, I think, maybe till week 8 or week 11. There's something around there. I can't remember what the exact date is where they can stretch it out. So I don't think he'll start the season with the team. I do think he'll be a great injection of additional depth and talent when he does come back. But I will offer, I'm a big Deshaun Shed fan. I will offer, Robert, that I did some analysis on where the Seahawks pass defense struggled last year. And there's some pretty damning signs that Deshaun Shed, especially in short patterns, like comeback routes, things of that nature, really struggled. And the teams really took advantage of him on that side. So I'll be interested to see if guys like Nico Thorpe or Jeremy Lane, can shore that up. I think Shed has some really obvious strengths. Mainly that he's strong. He's a former safety and has those big hands. But I think the team has some guys that can potentially step up and help in his absence.
Thank you.
Yeah. All I can add is that they're going to ease him back into action. Pete said yesterday that he got another procedure kind of to speed up the process. And with all the depth they have at corner right now with Griffin and with Thorpe, they don't need him to play anytime soon. So PUP is the likely scenario and maybe get him in for the second half of the year. And kind of what Brian was saying, Shed is a very assignment correct player, but he doesn't have the best ball skills. The turnover numbers have gone way down since he's kind of taken over that role, and it's not really his fault. That's just kind of his game, and he was intended to be more of a depth player that really learned that step kick technique and really got comfortable in the scheme from kind of growing up through the special teams to the safety to the corner. He really understood the scheme. So having him with Sherman and with Lane and with Griffin is going to be a nice addition for them late in the year. But I just can't see him playing before week 10 almost.
I just think with Jeremy Lane, I think the body type when you're matching up against receivers like we will face in the NFC West and outside the division, it's just something I'm not overly comfortable with at this point. But
I hear you, Robert, and I'm with you on the sense that the cornerback position has probably more to prove than any other position outside of offensive line on this roster. And I don't think anyone should assume that just because, the coaches are talking positively about Lane and I said that he's been looking better, that it's better. We got to watch it in the games. We got to see them actually face teams that they don't know what the plays are that are coming at them and don't recognize the players and don't play them every day. And the fact of the matter is Jeremy Lane, we've got tape on him. We've got history, and he has not been a great cornerback. He has been good at times, never great. And so I think if that's your starter, that's concerning. And the hope has to be that he has stepped forward. Something has clicked. The hope has to be that guys like Shaq Griffin or some of these other guys that are new pick things up more quickly and, eventually overtake them. So, that's what I'm hoping for. And what I saw from Shaq Griffin today was pretty encouraging. So I don't know if he'll overtake him by the time, the season starts, but there's some really nice things that I saw that I haven't seen from a lot of other cornerbacks in the Seahawks camp.
It's good to hear.
Yeah, and what I would add there too is that the way his guaranteed money in his contract lines up, Lane's really on edge this year, because if he doesn't perform, and this is all just talk, he's not going to be back on the team next year. And that's kind of how they drafted, and Shed will be back. And if Lane doesn't perform, they're probably going to waive him after the season. So this is kind of a do or die moment for his career after he got that big extension last year. So he's got to play. There's no doubt about it.
There's too much young talent coming up the tubes for him to not take advantage of the situation. That's yeah.
It's a great point. Thanks for asking your question, Robert.
Thanks, guys.
Yeah, I appreciate that. All right. Anyone else has questions? We're welcoming the questions. It's fun to get people from all over North America so far. We've had Austin, we've had Arizona, not in Seattle, but Toronto, Texas. And it looks like Sean wants to come back on the show.
Yeah, Sean, let's have another one.
Sean is from Austin, Texas. He was our first guest.
Thanks for having me back on. I want to hear Jeff and Brian, you guys talk about Jimmy Graham and the red zone. I don't know what is wrong with our coaching staff to where if we had 20 red zone plays, I do not mind forcing it to him 10 times out of 20. I don't know why we try to get so cute and artsy and just, throw it up to the big guy. Let him go get it. I mean, you see it with Gronk. You saw it with him in New Orleans. Do y'all have any thoughts on how we cope with this if the coaching staff doesn't ever change?
Go ahead, Jeff.
I think it's a combination of two things. I hate to be the guy who bags on the offensive coordinator and bags on Darrell Bevel, because I like Bevel. I think he's a pretty good designer and but down near the red zone, his play calling is peculiar. Unfortunately, we saw it in that Super Bowl. And I think the other part of it, is a lot of it is Russell Wilson. And a big part that he does have down there is his height does hurt him. And so the obvious logical option would be, why not just throw it up to Jimmy? He's a big target. He's strong. You should be able to see him from all angles. But Russell doesn't have the best vision. That's the kind of area where his height really affects him. And unless you're designing plays and he gets taken out, the play kind of breaks down. And a lot of the times I end up forcing the ball to Curse or throwing it out of bounds. And it just hasn't been a very effective solution. So it's got to be twofold. One, Russell's got to be more comfortable in ways you can use Graham down there. And it's going to be maybe first read stuff or stuff that you can do out of the play action. And Bevel's got to design better. And maybe they got to not have Curse as a primary option, or kind of use Procise as a way to free him up. But those two factors have really contributed to Graham being more of a middle of the field player than a red zone player. And that's not really why you traded the first round pick and Max Unger for him. You got him to score touchdowns. And as good as he was last year, you need him to be better. I'm totally with you. The frustration can be very high for me.
Yeah, I think that's well said. It's definitely well said, Sean, and I think you represent a lot of us in that frustration. And I'll agree with Jeff that some of it's definitely play calling. Some of it is quarterback reads and how. I'm not going to say that Russell is just making some mistakes, which I think he probably is. I think that's fair. He's still learning, but there's a certain amount of trust that has to be developed in a quarterback and a covered player to throw it to them and succeed. And that's going to take a little time to get there. I will tell you, encouraging signs today that they did red zone drills, and Jimmy was making multiple touchdown catches. He was spiking the ball right in the defender's face multiple times, making sure they knew about it. He had one of the best catches I've seen on a practice field today as well. Unreal. It was a third down play in full team drills, and Russell threw him the ball. It was to his left. Somehow Jimmy got like fingertip on it, managed to tip it up, tip it back to his other hand, tip it again, and grab it and run for another 15 yards after that. And it was it's a pretty ridiculous play. The amount of hand-eye coordination required to do what he did in the time that he did it. He's been everywhere in the first 3 days of camp. So I think, I will admit that I predicted that in our house, at least my house with my son, I thought that Jimmy Graham last year, back when they initially acquired him, I thought there was a chance that he was going to be the same impact on the Seahawks offense that Randy Moss had on the Patriots offense, and just really elevate them. Injuries, some other things aside, I think they might be ready for him to really take the offense forward. Russell is looking for him all the time, and I think that's a really good sign.
And one more thing I'd like to add. Russell puts out some of these videos in the offseason and when he's training down in LA, and sometimes there are these eye-rolling marketed videos that sometimes are hard to watch. But one of the things I did notice on one of the videos this year is when he was working out with Jimmy and a bunch of the receivers down in LA at USC and UCLA, he was specifically working on one kind of throw with Jimmy. You can see it in these videos. It was the back shoulder throw with a covered defender. And that's one of the areas they haven't been able to utilize Jimmy as well as he should have been. And I think having the full offseason with him, now that he's not battling a serious injury and being able to build that chemistry, as Brian just mentioned, I think that's going to go a long way because he's not the fastest player off the jump. He's a guy that wins with size and athletic ability. And you saw it in the Jets game last year. You saw it in the Bills game last year. He can make catches when he's completely covered, and he can make freak catches. And when you watch that Bills game, you figure, okay, they figured out how to use this guy finally, but then he disappears and has 2 targets 2 weeks later, So they got to get more consistent, and they got to score touchdowns down there because with this defense and with this running game, you're going to win a lot of games when you can score like that.
I got to build on what you said there one more time, but I think you're right to talk about the running game because the tight end's best friend is a running game. And they didn't have that last year. It was one of the worst running games in the NFL, which is crazy given who the Seahawks have been before. And one of Russell Wilson's greatest strengths is play action passing. So if you can get a team to actually respect your running game and the linebackers have to stay close, absolutely opens up play action passes for, the seam for the tight end to run up and get behind those linebackers. And so, that's a big part of why the run game is so important this year. I think it's only going to help, Jimmy Graham get even better.
All right. Thanks again, man. We got 2 questions from Tim, not on video, just he sent in these questions, and they're both Jimmy Graham related. So I'll just ask you them, Brian, then I'll comment.
Okay.
The first one was, how do you guys think Jimmy will age? And the second one was more or less, do you think Tony Gonzalez is a good comp? I know Davis Sue has talked about this on Twitter. They got beat in that Atlanta game by a kind of older, slower Tony Gonzalez. They couldn't cover him with their linebackers. Do you see him turning into that kind of player, or how do you see the guy aging as he kind of loses his speed and maybe he can't jump as high?
That's a really interesting question. I don't see them as similar athletes. Tony Gonzalez for me was a much stronger player. I think that he was more physical than Jimmy is. I think Jimmy is. This is going to come across the wrong way. I mean it respectfully. He's much more of a finesse, player than I think Gonzalez was. And I think that Jimmy is an elite route runner and pass catcher at that position. As he gets older, he's still going to be 6'7", and he's still going to be 250, 260, whatever he is. So I think, he's going to be able to still create space for himself to make catches. Tony Gonzalez was a one-of-a-kind player in the way that he was able to be productive at such a late age. It's hard for me to think that Jimmy's going to follow suit. It's hard for me to think almost anybody's going to follow suit. So I think that's a tough comp. But I absolutely think Jimmy Graham can be one of the top tight ends in the league for the next 4 years, without any hesitation.
Yeah, and I would agree with that a little bit. Just Tony Gonzalez had just such a unique ability to read a defense and find a hole in the defense, and his knowledge of schemes, and all those years in Kansas City, he was just a top-end player on a team that didn't really have any other passing games. And Jimmy Graham's been a great player, and yeah, there's some flaws in his game. He's not the toughest player in the world, although his blocking has really surprised me. And when he played in New Orleans, I thought he was a little bit soft. I'm not going to lie. When Seattle played them those in 2013, and Bruce Irvin, the whole "who's Jimmy" thing, I wasn't the biggest fan of him. And when they made the trade, I was kind of surprised they targeted him, given their history with them. And but I can see the athletic comp in terms of where like Jimmy can still be a valuable player if he loses his speed, and he can still win with size and win with routes. But I'm with you. I'm going to be hesitant. I'm not going to call him Tony Gonzalez. On the other hand, we're bringing in Jeff here. He's been raising his hand for a while, and let's bring him in for a question. So, Jeff, when you load up here, let us know where you're from, and then get to us with the question.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah. Hey, Jeff. Welcome.
Hey, I'm doing good. I am currently living in the Big D in Dallas, Texas.
Oh, man.
Hey, another Texan. Wow.
Longtime Seattle resident and 25-year season ticket holder. Moved here about a year ago. Still have my tickets, and I'll still be at quite a few games this year. And if you guys come down Christmas Eve, we'll make sure and hook up.
Oh, man.
Make something happen down here. Anyway, my question is kind of a random one about a position where there's absolutely no battle, and that's Mike Backer. And obviously, Bobby's a stud, and there's no position battle there. But in the past, he's had some injuries where he's lost some time. And their plan of late seems to be to move KJ into that role and then replace KJ. I've always thought that kind of weakens us at two different positions. So my question with all the new backers, is anybody a true Mike Backer, or are they just relying on the versatility of all these new guys? What do you think?
You want to take that one first, Jeff?
Yeah, off the top, I would agree with you. And I remember there was a game down in Kansas City a couple years ago when Wagner went out. KJ moved to the middle, and Malcolm Smith moved into KJ's role. And they really struggled at tackling. And I had the same thought. I said, you're hurting two spots. You're hurting the scheme. They really need to get a backup inside linebacker that can kind of slide. And you're not going to get a Wagner or someone near that level. Wagner's an all-pro player who can run and tackle and read defenses. And Brock Coyle wasn't that guy, and I think that's why they were willing to move on from him. They brought in Arthur Brown thinking maybe he can do it. He was a guy they liked in the 2013 draft. He's already gone. And I think the guy that's starting to line up at that position is Michael Wilhoit, the guy they signed from San Francisco. I think cutting Brown and bringing in Morgan kind of aligns Wilhoit as a backup linebacker, so you don't have to move right over. And Wilhoit isn't as fast as Bobby Wagner. He's not as an explosive athlete like those guys, but he's a savvy, assignment-correct player. He's tough. He's physical. And I think you can get by with him in the middle in a pinch. And the way the roster lines up more with Garvin and Morgan back, that's sort of looking like he's the guy. It's no Wagner, obviously. Yeah. But I think it's a suitable backup role, and a guy who's been around, knows the division. He's not going to make explosive plays, but he's a guy the coaches can trust, and that goes a long way.
Okay. Cool.
Yeah, I think you've got some interesting things going on in the linebacker core, and I will admit that Jeff, I haven't had a chance to focus in on that part yet of the roster as much as I'd want to answer your question the way I'd want. But here's the factors that I've noticed so far. So one, Terrence Garvin absolutely has the potential to move into that middle, the Mike linebacker spot as a backup. I think he's got that ability. I think Michael Wilhoit could potentially do it as well. I don't think he moves well enough necessarily to be a great coverage option. So that's part of why I like Garvin. I think he's got the speed to be able to take some of the drops. We've all seen Bobby take, which are super deep, uniquely deep because of how fast Bobby is. But there's some other factors at play here, which is special teams. The linebackers are a huge part of what's going on with special teams. And so you've got a guy like Dewey McDonald, who was second on the team in special teams tackle last year. He's a linebacker. They got to figure out if they're going to keep him around. You've got a guy like Alexander, who they traded for, who's a Pro Bowl special teamer, who they're absolutely going to keep around, and they got to figure out where he fits. And I would even call out Otha Peters, had a pick 6 yesterday. Undrafted rookie. He's made some nice plays. So they've got some interesting athletes back there. I think it's going to come down largely to special teams. I don't think it's going to primarily be how good of a backup Mike they're going to be. I think that's the major factor. And I am pretty fond of the idea of Garvin, being that fourth linebacker who can come in at pretty much any of the 3 spots if need be. So, I may be overly excited after what I've seen from 3 days, but he moves really well. I'm excited to see him in a real game.
All right. Thanks, guys. Love this. And so happy to help you with the whole Patreon thing, and wish you the best.
Thanks, man. I really appreciate it.
Thanks a lot, man. We'll let you know if we come to Dallas.
You do that.
All right, man. Thanks a lot.
Yeah.
And Brian, we have another question from Tim, who just keeps sending in questions. And it's actually good because I was actually going to ask you this. So this covers 2 birds with 1 stone.
Good.
His question is, what have you seen from Nick Vannett at camp so far? I know the team was very excited to get him.
Nick made a really nice catch yesterday. Want to say he had another one today. There was so much that happened at camp today. It was hard to remember some of the individual plays, but he hasn't jumped out, if you can tell by my answer. I think he's playing fine. I think the tight end that's actually kind of surprised me, and I always have to look up his first name. 85. I keep writing down the number. Marcus Lucas. So Marcus Lucas is a undrafted free agent that they signed on the practice squad. Last year he's on the practice squad for a little bit of time. So the team knows him a little bit. He's making plays every day, multiple plays. And there's nothing that stands out that much about him. I mean, he's decent size, normal, decent athlete, nothing amazing, but he's getting open. He's making catches. He's making plays. Reminds me a little bit of Brandon Williams from last year. I started hyping him from, first practice I saw, but he was a physical specimen. I was like, God, this guy looks like he can really block. And that alone was exciting. I wouldn't say that about Lucas. So anyway, he's one tight end that stood out a little bit. But I'm just assuming Nick Vannett's going to be the 3rd tight end. It would take a pretty big upset for that to change. And I'd be pretty surprised if they kept 4 tight ends again. I think Brandon Williams forced his way onto that roster last year with his special teams play as well as his blocking. I don't know that any of the tight ends are going to be worth keeping 4 for.
Yeah. And guys, if you're still listening, we're still taking questions. And in the meantime, while there's no questions in right now, I'm going to get back to asking Brian some stuff. As we've been going for over an hour, we've had guys here from Austin, Dallas, Toronto, Arizona. This has been crazy. But we opened the show with Kam Chancellor. And as I said in our opening episode of Real Hawk Talk, one of the things I like to look at is just the front office perspective. And Brian always has kind of a measured view. And so Cam was the big story today. He's locked in now. They don't have to worry about him. But there's still a couple big pending free agents coming up this year. We dealt with this a bit last week. Justin Britt, Jimmy Graham. How much does this deal change maybe their future with the team, or does it change it at all? And do you think this hurts any of them?
Yeah, that's a fair question, Jeff. Evan Andrews on our staff is the guy who does our cap analysis, and I know he's been working on the Cam contract. And for those of you that are in the Facebook group for the patrons, you saw that he provided some instant analysis on that. I think he's gonna be writing a post in more detail. I haven't had a chance to look at it with enough information to say how this is going to affect other people. I did, see from Evan that it looks like it's going to clear up some space this year. I think the ripple effect of that, assuming that's true, is that that might clear some room to extend a guy like Britt, who's going to probably cost more money this year. And so that might be, the way I've seen them strategize before is they do have a specific order that they want to sign guys. And I think getting Kam extended was not just because of his importance to the team, but probably strategically from managing the cap standpoint, to then know what they had to spend on these other guys. And so I think we might see Britt happen next. Earl's a guy that, man, I don't think we'll ever see a player like him on the Seahawks again. He's incredibly unique. I'm loving his look he's rocking right now. He looks like Ed Reed. He's got like the veteran, I don't give a crap anymore. I'm growing my hair out, my beard out, and he's wearing short shorts and like long white leggings during camp. I mean, he's just out there doing Earl. And so the idea of the Seahawks without Earl is not an idea I like to think about. So if he's willing to play, that's the biggest question. Is he committed and excited to keep playing? And if he is, you keep him around. That guy's a once in a lifetime kind of player to have on your team.
And you saw life without Earl last year, and it was scary. It was terrifying.
Yeah.
The whole scheme fell apart in the second. Yeah, and I think people aren't talking about Earl enough, I don't think. It's the fact that he's almost a non-story of how quickly he's transitioned back to the field. Pete said today he's looking as fast as he did in the rookie year, 2011, his sophomore year. And that's a stunner. This guy's coming off a broken leg, and he's gone bigger and stronger, and he just looks fired up to play right now. And he's been my favorite Seahawk since he was drafted. So this is incredible news to me.
He's a crazy character too. I mean, but he is. That is absolutely true. And in fact, shame on me for not writing more about it so far. But I've sat there each of the 3 days, and I catch myself at least once, and usually a couple times, just looking at his legs. And he is thickened up. And I think that it's potentially, I'd be interested if someone asked him, but I think the rehab that he had to do to get ready and come back from the injury could be having some unintended, or unexpected positive effects. He tweeted out a short video highlight film of some of his rehab work that he was doing. I think it was last night he sent that out. But he looks thick, and I'm really excited to see how that translates onto the field. I would say overall, the secondary that looks great. I mean, it's hard to keep in mind how good Richard Sherman, Earl Thomas, and Kam Chancellor are. We will never, ever see a Seahawks secondary that approaches how good this team is. And they still are amazing. So hopefully they're all healthy as they're going to be. Are they healthy as they've been? And we'll actually get to see that group kind of return to their rightful place as the best secondary in the NFL.
Yeah, it's unbelievable the amount of guys they've been able to sign. And I saw Trey Wingo was tweeting out just the amount they've given to the secondary. And just the average fan doesn't realize that there's room for all these guys. There's room to bring all these guys back. And John Schneider and the team he's assembled has done such a good job of just keeping these core guys. And I see all these comments like, oh, they're going to be out of cap room, blah, blah, blah. They actually saved cap space by this Chancellor move. And it's amazing that they can keep star at all three levels, a star quarterback, Doug Baldwin, Jimmy Graham. And it's just unbelievable how much talent they've assembled. And sometimes you lose sight of that. Maybe sometimes you're upset about the offensive line or Graham's usage in the red zone. It's just unbelievable how much talent this team still has. And they're going to be a contender every year with this group. And it's just fascinating to me. And we're taping on a Tuesday. The Seahawks are off tomorrow. They're not going 4 days in a row, so this is good if you need your Seahawks fix on a commute. There's not going to be your training camp practices. But it looks like we have another question. Sean wants to come back in for his third.
I'll take one more, and
this will be the final question.
Yeah.
Let's see if we can get him back in here. This will be the final question for a good night of questions.
On and share a little bit about Earl. He's from UT, so that's in my backyard here. I read an article. I think his trainer was like Tony Hill or some guy that he worked with in the offseason. And he was just saying, I don't know if y'all saw that article, but he was just saying that he looks just like a flat out animal, that he has just attacked his rehab, that he has actually gotten stronger from when, in years past, and that he's just really knocked it out, and that he's laser focused. I mean, he will work out, go home, come back and work out, and he works out like 4 times a day, or, he just had a really, really strong off season. So I haven't really seen that talked about as much ever since that article, but it's good to see that y'all are seeing that, or at least Brian out at practice, you're seeing the results of that. And then second, go ahead.
No, go ahead. Finish your thought.
The second thing is also being down here in Austin. I'm a Texas A&M graduate, so I know Ifedi pretty well from college, and I don't want to say the sky's falling yet, but he scares me at right tackle, left tackle, any tackle spot. I had hopes when they drafted him that moving him inside to guard, that's a pretty good spot for him, I thought. So now the fact that they're moving him back out, I don't know what that means. I don't know if they're just are wishfully thinking that he'd be the tackle, but based on what I saw of him playing at A&M, every Saturday, that's not really the player that we're looking for out at tackle.
Yeah. Thanks, Sean.
Thanks, Sean.
So I will just quickly respond to the Earl stuff and say that, I mean, I think he looks as good as he's been. And, I'll never forget, I want to say it was 2012. I was talking to Gus Bradley. We were at dinner and talking about the players and talking about how much talent. I was like, I think you guys have this amazing talent. Like, you guys are going to be an amazing defense. And the anecdote he told me was he pulled out his phone and showed it to me, and there was a text message from Earl Thomas asking, this was at like 10:30 at night, asking for the code to get into the video room at the VMAC so he could be going through tape. And he said every night, I could have shown you my phone every night. He's in there grinding. And that at that point, he was second year in the league or something along those lines. And it always stuck with me. Earl was already a Pro Bowl safety at that point. He'd already kind of made his mark as being a special player. And he had this drive. And the thing that always concerned me after the Super Bowl was when he started making comments, even after the San Diego loss, second week of the season in 2014, he just felt like he had to remind himself to have the fire. He didn't have the same fire. And as a fan, I could relate to it because I didn't honestly have the same fire after we won the Super Bowl. And so when he talked about retiring last year, I think that was real. Despite whatever anyone else says, I think he was really questioning whether he still had the fire. And I think he's been questioning that. And so this injury and the fact that he's attacked it the way he has, and he's come back and he's got this focus about him that he's, when he's locked in, there's nobody like him. I think this could be a huge year for him. It'd be friggin' awesome because there's not anyone else like him in the NFL that can do what he can do when his mind's set.
All right, Sean, thanks for coming on. You've been very helpful tonight. And
do you want me to leave you with an actual question?
I think we're good for now. Don't worry about it, man.
Okay. All right.
Thanks you. Yeah, I'm going to echo that sentiment on Earl. He's, to me, you're watching a first ballot Hall of Famer in the prime of his career. And he just reminds me of like Ed Reed and Troy Polamalu in one player. And it's just, you saw him without him last year. I think watching his defense kind of crumble without him, that really sparked his fire, and that must have been hard for him. And I think that's been part of the comeback story. But overall, this was incredible tonight. We got tons of guests. We got tons of good questions. And we've been going for almost an hour and a half. So we're gonna close up tonight. That's another episode of the Real Hawk Talk show. We're gonna be back next week, and we got a good guest in store for you guys. And we're gonna be teeing up the first preseason game. It's crazy to think about. And Brian will be back with more observations. Hopefully we'll have an update on Malik McDowell by then. But until then, thanks for joining us, and we'll have the audio and the video up on the site as soon as we can. Brian, if you have anything to say to end it off.
Have a good night, everybody. Go Hawks.
All right. Thanks, everyone.